Okay, I'm Megan Thormans-Gard. I have been teaching 3 years all at Kingfisher, and one of them was a COVID year, so really only 2. I'm probably not very qualified to be presenting to you, so I brought 2 people that are. This is Macy Gibson and Ivy Hartman. They're both accredited parliamentarians. They both were on my very first conduct of chapter meetings team. They were 3rd in the nation. They learned the very hard way about the time limit rule on the final stage. They went over by 30 seconds or something, so got smoked. But that was the last time their team went overtime. And then they were on the Parley Pro team and qualified for the semifinals this year at Nationals. And Macy was named the national chair. So hopefully these girls can answer any questions from a student's perspective that we might have. They help me a lot with my teams. They help with my Parley Pro team and my conduct team. So if you have a Parley Pro team or a conduct team already started, or you're looking to start one, this is the number 1 piece of advice I can tell you, is to keep your kids involved, because they will help you a lot with practices. And it's weird how much students like Parley Pro. They still come to practice even though their eligibility is up. So does everyone have a handout? Anyone need one? Okay. There's a lot of random things in your packet. It's not in any rhyme or reason. So to start, anyone in here have any Parley Pro experience? Have a team, coach a team? Have ever competed in Parley Pro before? Okay, a few. To just start out, when I took the job at Kingfisher, I had never done Parley Pro. I had no idea what was going on. I was hoping that Mrs. Burns would take her qualified teams to nationals and we could just stop because I was not looking forward to it. I was hoping to just dwindle that out. But kids really, really enjoy it, and it's not near as hard as people make it out to be. Girls, Ivy, is Parley Pro easier or harder than ag issues?
A lot easier.
And Macy's on a meets team. Do you think meets is harder? Yeah, Parley Pro is really pretty easy. So keep that in mind. Don't be scared of it. I feel like that scares a lot of ag teachers off. So where to start? The state contest only has 3 pieces to it. Your students will be expected to take a test, perform a meeting, and answer some oral questions. So those are the only 3 things that you have to prepare your students to do. So that, until you make it to nationals, really preparing for the state contest is pretty simple. And from that standpoint, not all that overwhelming to students either, to just learn how to do a meeting, take a short multiple choice test, which there is an example of. It's on the state website as well, but that's in your packet, just an example of those easy multiple choice questions in your packet I provided. Okay, the test.
The test is really easy.
Be a little louder, Mace.
It's just like basic Parley Pro knowledge. If you know the chart that's on the front of your packet, your kids will be pretty good at the test. We didn't study the test at all before state, and we still did fine. We went to our first contest, didn't study the test at all. We got last, but that wasn't because of the test. The test is super easy. It's basically the exact same as the conduct test. There's no new information on it. So if your kids did conduct, they should be fine on the test.
Yeah, oftentimes I won't tell my students that there even is a test because they will waste their time worrying about it, and that's my own personal preference. By no means should you be telling your kids not to study for the test, but I would much rather them work on a meeting and work on making sure that they know this chart. If they understand the chart, they will understand the test, they'll understand the oral questions. A lot of times a test question like, Ivy, what's the purpose to recess?
It's to take a short break.
Yeah, to take a short break. And so if they know the purpose, or oftentimes, is recess amendable? It's on the chart. I'll white out these boxes and make a bunch of copies and just have them fill them in. Fairly often, I will leave that as a quick sub work to add to whatever they were working on that day. And if they can fill out the chart, that will help them with the test and oral questions immensely. I have never written a Parley Pro test. I buy them all from Shane Dunbar. He has thousands for sale online. I put the QR link here, but I also added some order suggested order lists that he has put together for coaches and teachers preparing Parlay Pro teams. And I put those in your packet. By no means do you need to buy things from him. I'm not sponsored. I wish I was. I'm a huge fan of Shane Dunbar. I call him with stupid questions all the time that I'm afraid to ask Mrs. Burns. And he answers all of them. He will send you whatever you need. He also, if you get on his email list, sends you 2 free Parlay Pro attachments, I guess, every month. So you can get 2 of them. I attached the 2 free ones that I got this month in your packet as well. And those are rules of debate and the purpose of rules relating to motions. So he'll send you free things every month if you just email him. I wouldn't waste my time writing any tests. I click print, I added them to my Google Drive, or I'll write them into a Google form. But he has a ton of materials that you can use. And if you go to his website, you can find all sorts of stuff. He will probably send you a CD disc, so you'll have to find a way to get it in your computer. Oftentimes we don't have computers that take a CD anymore, but it's really good stuff. So the meeting is the big chunk of Parlay Pro, right? And probably what overwhelms most students. We spend honestly more than 90% of our time on meetings. And when you first start out with your team, it'll take an entire practice to even get a majority of the way through. For a long time, we didn't even get through 1 meeting in our hour-long practice time. But that's okay because you're going to spend a lot of time stopping, answering questions, talking about each motion. But before you set your students loose, a few things I think that they need to understand in order to have a meeting is how to make each motion. So what are you going to say when you stand up? So go over each of those with them, and here's the list, right, of each motion that they need to be able to make that could potentially be on their card. So go over what they're going to say when they stand up to make one of those motions. How do they debate? When are you going to make each motion? Because if you hand a kid a motion card, say, okay, you have amend and you have recess, they're going to stand up and make them haphazardly just to kind of cross it off of their list if they don't understand that their meeting needs to make sense. So when to make each motion, and then what your required motions are and their required debate. So within a meeting, each of your students will have to make 2 required motions. And one of those will be on their card. So in your packet, there is an example of a motion card. I can't remember what the main motion was. It was kind of like, I can't remember. What is the main motion in there, Ivy?
Conduct an activity to encourage membership.
Oh, yeah, 100% membership. So, yeah, that's something your high school students would want to talk about at their chapter meeting, right? Sometimes the motions you draw, students are not interested in. Girls, what was one of your least favorite motions?
Build a greenhouse.
Yeah, we did build a greenhouse a lot.
It was the bicycle. It was like bicycle safety course.
A bicycle safety course, yeah. A really hard one for them is like, let's buy American flags for every classroom, or simple ideas. Like, it's hard to debate things that many times. But your students are going to need 2 required motions. One of them will be given to them on the card. So the underlined motion on the example is what?
Division of assembly.
So if that was your card, Ivy, you would know that you have division, and you need to make sure that you make that motion. No one else on her team can make it. But then she'll have one additional motion that she has to make. What would your other motion be if you had that card, Ivy?
I do parliamentary inquiry because suspend the rules along here.
Okay, we like to do parliamentary inquiry and suspend the rules together. So she was going to help her teammate out and do parliamentary inquiry so that her teammate could do suspend the rules. But so she knows, she kind of has a game plan ahead of time that she wants to do those 2 motions, but she has to do division. No one else on her team can do division because that's her assigned motion. So they'll have 2 required motions. The main motion and adjourn count. So whoever stands up to make the main motion and they have their required motion, they're good to go. So that's an easy one. And then they need to debate 4 times. What are you going to debate on, Ivy?
We can talk about like what kind of activity we could host or where to host it at.
Good.
So
So,
is yours canned on your parliamentary flyer?
what's that? Canned on what?
Parliamentary flyer?
Yes. Yes, we always do parliamentary inquiry with suspend the rules. Typically, and they did that when they went to nationals. When we go to state, we just do parliamentary inquiry whenever.
For state, we did it on recess.
Oh yeah, for state, yeah,
Just on whatever motion we had on the card.
they would just do it on, yeah, they would just do it on a random motion. For nationals, we did can it and do it on suspend the rules just because it made them look like they understood those motions a little better. Yeah. But does it really earn you any more points? Not really. As long as you hit your required motions, debate the correct amount of times, you can max out your points very easily.
So,
Yes.
so the assigned one here is division of assembly.
Yes.
I understand that, so this person needs to do that one, but if someone else does it, as long as this person does it, is that at some point during the meeting, is that
Yes.
okay? Like if someone jumps the gun and
Does
does it-
division?
Yeah.
I don't know if there is a rule. Yes, it does make sense. I don't know if there's a rule about doing a motion 2 times. You can do point of order and parliamentary inquiry as many times as you want. Say our chair, Macy, messes up, does something wrong, someone rises to a point of order to fix what she was doing, but it wasn't on the card, it wasn't an assigned motion, and maybe it was their third motion, but no one else on the team stood up to correct her. It's much better to correct your chair and have a correct meeting than it would be to let it go. So it's okay to have those extra motions. It probably would be pretty bad if 2 people did division. I don't know that it's in the rules anywhere, but if it's on the card, the kid with that motion really needs to make it. If that were to happen, I would expect Ivy to still call division later, because if she doesn't make it, truthfully, our state scoring card, I didn't put it in there because I think it's changing this year, but I think you lose 40 points if you don't hit your required motion. So, but we'll have to double check that when those rules get updated. So 4 total debates. 2 of those debates need to be on the main motion, and then 2 of those debates can be on other subsidiary motions throughout the meeting. That's how we break it up. 2 required motions, 2 debates on the main motion, and then 2 more on subsidiary. So on this card, are there any debatables on the motion?
Amend.
So there's 1 debatable motion on the required motion list. So typically we would hope that a teammate would use one of their other motions to make another debatable so that they didn't have to amend 2 times each. That would be a lot of boring debates about the amendment, right? So hopefully they would make another debatable motion like postpone definitely, postpone indefinitely, refer, one of those that's debatable as well to kind of break it up. We hit the slide, Mace. Thanks. Okay, for those of you that don't know, Robert's Rules of Order is updated all the time. They just updated it again, and so you need the current version, which is the white cover. We order all of ours off of Amazon.
How many do you buy?
Really, we don't buy a bunch until we make it to nationals, and then each kid really needs their own. But we probably have 6 in our rack room. But kids aren't banging down the door to read Robert, I will tell you that. So they are lightly used. I don't think you need very many. Probably just 1 or 2, unless you're going to have your kids sit down and read through each motion. They are going to like Parley Pro a lot less. The girls really suffered through that. But if you don't know how you want your students to make each motion, or what to say like, I don't know how to move lay on the table, you can look it up in Robert, and it will give you the correct options or correct ways you can do it. Or you can buy a sheet from Shane Dunbar. He has his own script that you can just purchase from him. Or you can watch the millions of videos that National FFA has of the final stage and see how different teams have made those motions in the past. And if you watch those, each Final Four team, they have the same motion card, and you can see how different each team's meeting sorts out and how not every meeting is not going to be the same. And a lot of teams make their motions differently, handle their meetings differently. And so you can get a lot of ideas watching those videos on YouTube. It takes a long time, but you can get a lot of good ideas from the National Final Four videos. We hit it again, Mace. Thanks. Okay, so debate is one of the first things we talk about. Students really like to learn how to debate. They like to be able to say whatever they want. And so we did use the same motion a lot just to give students kind of a consistency. Maybe don't use, I moved to build a greenhouse, because they absolutely despise it. But oftentimes if you have a group of boys, you can do sillier motions about tractors and buying trucks, and it kind of gives them a little bit of creativity that they can learn to come up with their own ideas to throw in there. So I'll let students pick their motion that we are talking about to just learn how to do debates. We just had a Parley Pro meeting a couple of weeks ago, and apparently it's not super important that you have an intro and a closing. I think it's really important. It makes your students sound really well-rounded. And these are two very bland examples, but an introduction to a debate, when they stand up, Ivy's going to say, Madam President, Macy's going to call on her. She's going to say, I stand in favor of this motion. Each student will have their own favorite intros and closings that they'll try and use, but then she'll state her idea. And so for their ideas, they need to relate directly to the main motion. We always say, what should your idea be about, girls? What are they like?
When, where, how, why, all of those.
Yeah, so a location, who could be involved, when we could have it, where we could have it, who we could invite, why it's a good idea, why it's a bad idea. Those are kind of the basic pieces that your students need to be debating about. But it relating to the main motion is absolutely critical for you getting full points. We learned at our meeting recently, they don't want to hear quotes. They don't want anything that sounds canned. They would much rather you have a made-up statistic that relates to the main motion than a memorized stat that kids can throw into multiple motions. So make sure your students are really talking about the main motion, whether the main motion is really interesting or not. This would be a really hard motion for students to debate. The state conduct card this year, I think, was about building a trophy case. So sometimes those debates can get a little boring, but if you give your students, tell them to be creative, come up with things that relate, hopefully they are all unique debates. And then their closing. Stand with me and vote yes. Or, let's all vote in the affirmative. Things like that. So they need to have 3 parts to their debate. In my opinion, it needs to have an intro, your idea, and then the closing. And that's how we go over debates. When we're starting, I let them use paper and pencil to write their ideas down. But in Parley Pro, you don't get a pencil and paper like you do in conduct. So make sure by the time you get close to area and state, they're not using those anymore, because they'll only have their minute before the meeting to practice. We hit the next. Thanks. So when to make each motion. This is really important, and I think it's one of the harder things to understand, don't you guys? But if you have recess on your card, sometimes you want to just get your required motion out of the way so that you know you're done, right? But it doesn't make sense to move recess before you've debated and right as the meeting started. Right? If you come into a meeting before anything's happened, someone stands up and moves to recess, it seems kind of silly. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. You can do that. There's nowhere on the scorecard that says their meeting didn't make sense, I'm going to deduct 40 points. But it's better for students to understand each motion and the purpose behind it and the purpose of when they should be making it, and I think that will help them a lot in oral questions and on the test if they know the practicality of when to apply these motions. So recess, not at the very beginning. In the middle, towards the end. A lot of times you'll have more motions that need to go towards the end, so we try and do ours towards the middle, or after just a little bit of debate in the beginning, but not right away. Previous question. What does previous question do, Ivy?
It ends debate.
Yeah.
It takes it directly to the vote.
Right. So when is it imperative that you do not do previous question?
If people still have to debate, you can't do it.
Yeah. If you do, then your team's going to lose a lot of points, right? So previous question, you want to make sure that your teammates are done debating. This is a really easy one to forget to do. They have a teammate that's notorious. We always hope she never got previous question on her card because she would sit there and we would all be waiting for her to stand up and move previous question, but she would forget about it because it's at the very end. You could teach your students to move it on on a debatable motion if you wanted so that it wasn't at the very end. It's all your preference. Or you could let your kids do it whenever they wanted, really, and it could be up to them. We try and make it pretty consistent so they know what to expect from each other because there are so many variables within the meeting, but really just make sure it makes sense when they move it and the rest of their teammates have the opportunity to get all 4 of their debates. A lot of the points come from debates, so it is really important that they get all 4. Amend, you're not going to amend the main motion at the very beginning. You are going to want to hear out the rest of your team's thoughts on the main motion before you amend it. So that's something that we definitely try to do towards the end, towards the middle, but it is a debatable, so that's nice. But you definitely want to make sure that your team has had the opportunity to debate the main motion at least once before you amend it. Hit that slide, Gibson. Okay, oral questions.
Oral questions, they seem very scary at first, but they're obviously they're all very different, but they're very simple. If you understand the chart and understand the motions, very similar to the test, you can really understand what they're asking you and know how to answer these questions. They all generally ask about what each motion is for, or if it can be amended and things like that are on the chart. So if your students understand the chart, they'll have not a very difficult time with these oral questions. But I think starting out, the oral questions are some of the most daunting things because a lot of students are scared to stand up there and have an adult ask them questions, but they have to answer in front of everyone else. But after they understand the chart and understand how a meeting works, they're very simple and very easy to get used to.
And that's at the conclusion. Is that right?
Yes, after the meeting's over, yep, then they'll ask oral questions. And a lot of times, so Ivy had division on her card, the judge will say to the member who moved division of assembly, and then they will ask a question about division to that student. Sometimes it's not, but most of the time they ask about that motion in particular. A lot of times I think what stumps students is their question will be really long. And so as a student who's never answered oral questions at a contest, the judge will stand up and say, to the member who moved division of assembly, can you please list all 5 standard descriptive characteristics of this motion? And they're like, standard descriptive characteristics. What does that mean? But it's the chart. So make sure your students are familiar with that lingo and maybe ask them some of those questions, which you can buy from Shane Dunbar. That's what I do. It's probably, as close to cheating as you can get, buying all those resources from him. But there's a lot of content to be utilized there. But the standard descriptive characteristics of division, Ivy, what are they?
It's not debatable, it's not amendable, it does not require a second, it may interrupt the speaker, and it can be moved when other business is pending.
Yeah, so it's a simple question, right? Does it require a second? You just have to break it down and think about it. But a lot of times the way the questions are asked are kind of daunting. Even though, sometimes I hear the questions, I'm like, geez, why don't you just ask them why you moved recess? So that you can really understand what students know. But oral questions and the test, to me, it's studying the same content. They can fill out the chart and they know about each motion, why they make it, when they make it. And they'll need to know if it requires a second in the meeting. So those things, they'll learn along the way. They just have to stop and think about the question. So oral questions and the test should be learned along the way. They should really learn them as you're doing the meeting as well. We were talking about it on the way. Macy is the only person who gets to write. The chairman is the only person who will get to keep track of what's happening in the meeting. She's kind of created her own system and her own chart, but make sure you teach your chairman how to make a chart and how to keep track of debate, because oftentimes if one of the team members is missing a debate or hasn't made their motion, Macy is very good at making really subtle eye contact with her teammates to tell them, like, hey, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, but she knows that because she's keep track of it on her paper. Or say someone hasn't finished debating, they're missing a debate, and she knows there's one person who has another motion left, and she can tell they're going to move previous question because there's nothing left. She will try and not call on that person that she thinks is going to make the motion and try and, stare at that kid who hasn't debated so that hopefully they stand up and get those points. You really want to make sure that your chair has a good understanding of the meeting, a good understanding of what their chart needs to look like along the way. So Macy, do you want to just explain to them your little dot system here?
Okay, so this is like the names of the people on your team. Normally I just write the first letter of their name, but I just draw out my name. This is like their debate on the main motion. Every time they debate, I just draw a dot so that I know that they've already debated. And so because each member has to debate once before they can debate again on the main motion, I make sure to draw a dot so that I know, well, Ivy's already debated and Layla hasn't, so I need to call on Layla. And then this is just their extra motion debate. I just call it the subsidiary motion debate. And so that's how I know that she's debated twice on an extra motion, which is what she needs to do. And then this is the motions they've made because they have to make 2 motions. So I just draw that out so that I know that they've made all their motions. And Dustin here, he hasn't debated twice on the main motion. So I know that he's not done yet. But when somebody's is full, I write a check at the end so I know not to call on them.
Because sometimes kids will get to sitting there and then they'll forget that they have debated and they will try and stand up and debate again. That's what happened to them in nationals. And so sometimes kids just get kind of nervous and they're like, man, maybe I better debate again just in case, right? Because it's better to debate an extra time than to debate, one more than necessary or one less than necessary. So this is pretty important. She draws dots because you don't want your chairman up there scribbling around. It's very distracting. They have to have the gavel, and they really have a control over a lot of what your presence of your meeting is going to look like. So make sure they're not scribbling away. She draws her chart out with the names and stuff during the 1 minute before the meeting starts. So make sure your chairman has a paper and pencil. A lot of times they won't have paper or pencil up there. So make sure your chair brings that.
Normally at the bottom, I write the motions that are on the card and the main motion. So if somebody makes amend, I can just write the amendment at the end of the main motion so that I don't forget it. And then at the bottom, I write the motions on the card so that I can mark them off and know that we've done them all.
Yeah. And so for her, when there's point of order on the card, it's imperative that she knows point of order is on the card. If she doesn't mess up, then her teammate's going to be waiting. We have our chair mess up, and that's what we do point of order on. So hopefully if she forgets and doesn't do it, her teammate stands up and interrupts a speaker or intentionally does something incorrect. But for us, we try and have our chair do something wrong. But she needs to know that point of order is on the card. And sometimes the chair will forget to look at those motions and just think about doing their job and repeating things back. But the amendment is a good point you bring up, Macy. Being able to regurgitate the main motion and what the member just stood up to amend sometimes is a lot for your chair, especially when the motion is really long, or if you have a motion that has 2 pieces to it and then they want to amend. Sometimes if your chair repeats the amendment back incorrectly, then your members get a little frazzled, and so that's very helpful to have them write it down, and then to have them write the amendment helps a lot as well, just to keep them on track, because your chair is going to have to restate the motion pretty often throughout the meeting. So, awesome. What's the next one, Ivy? Oh, that's it. Okay, great. That's a lot. Parley Pro has a lot of pieces, but really it's pretty simple, and your kids are going to pick it up really quickly. I learned right alongside them. If you study with your kids and you look up the answers to their questions, you will figure it out. And it's really not very hard. And your kids will, I'm shocked to this day how much kids like Parley Pro. I really did not want to do it, but it's fun once you learn how to do it, and your students' speaking skills will improve because they are thinking on their feet, and they'll become better at answering oral questions with their public speaking. So, and they need it for their state degree, right? How many of us check that Parley Pro box when we have never taught our students Parley Pro? Probably not any of you, but people who aren't here. So it is really important. Do you guys want to see them demonstrate any motions on the paper that are difficult, or have any questions for them or myself?
What is division of assembly?
Okay, so division of assembly is when you're questioning the vote. So say 3 members voted yes and 2 members voted no, and Macy thought the no's were louder, and she thought maybe it was no, and she said the no's have it and the motion fails, taps her gavel. And Ivy's like, that's not true. We all voted yes. So Ivy stands up and says division or division of assembly. There's 3 or 4 ways you can make it, Robert says. And so then she's questioning the vote, and it tells the chair to call for a rising vote, and it's an accurate count of how it's voted. So, yeah.
So on that Dunbar website, is there like a list where it tells you what each one of these motions is? Because I've never done any of this at all, so some of these I don't know at all.
Where they
Kids
are?
are going to know, like just what each one of them means.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, glossary.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, because there's some of these.
On the website, there are random vocabulary word sheets you can get. I mean, that talk about quorum and random Parley Pro vocabulary that you would only learn if you read the book, which is, it's a dry read. Nobody does that. I don't read, Robert. But he has a lot of resources. And a lot of them are free if you just consistently email him every month. You can pick 2 things every month and he sends them to you. I have a lot of random things I never use that he sent me, but I have them in case I ever need them. If you guys want more free things that I have had sent to me, I can forward them to you. So.
If you're trying to start like a conduct of chapters meeting, CMIC has a booklet for conduct of chapters that you can order. And it helps teach kids like from the get-go, from the very beginning, about motions and how to present motions and getting them on the fast track to getting to parliamentary procedure with conduct of chapters.
I think they have a brown Parley Pro book too.
Yeah.
I don't have the conduct. No, I do have the Parley Pro one.
It's really helpful.
Huh. Sweet.
Because it gives them specific, like, because most kids don't know what to say when it comes to each motion, and it gives them like an example of how to present the motion. It's really generic,
Yeah.
but it gives them an example and helps them form the idea of what they're going to say before they even kind of understand what to say.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're starting with conduct, which all of our Parley Pro kids do conduct first, it's a really easy stepping stone. I would highly recommend doing that. We just start and we have every single kid move recess. Everyone say it out loud. Stand up, get called on, move recess. The chair will repeat it that many times, so it's great for your chair as well. And then we work on the next motion. So next we're going to all do division. Next we're going to all move amend, right? And so practicing each of those will give kids confidence and then set them free. But your meetings are going to be pretty rough for a long time. It's going to take a while for kids to understand and to know. Like, people expect Ivy to talk about plant science. So, hey, maybe this kid, don't talk about plant science. You know that's Ivy's thing. She loves plants. She wants to talk about her horticulture system, talk about her SAE. And so kids kind of need to get the vibe from each other and get used to what each other move. Some kids hate, like, if it's not their required motion on their card, one of their teammates, Layla, she would never move amend. She would never come up with her own verbiage to add to a motion. Never, unless she absolutely had to. So they know Layla's not going to make that debatable motion and that somebody else needs to. So it's going to take them a while to kind of figure each other out, figure out what motions they like, how to do them, things like that. And you just kind of got to let them go. I think it's helpful to not pick on them, even though they sound really rough and their seconds are like, I don't know, an a cappella group, second, all over the place, and their voting is bad and it's hard to listen to. Let them get the basics down. Having a sharp sounding second, standing up straight, and speaking really fluent, I mean, that's not going to get you any extra points, even though oftentimes I think it should. But it's not going to get you any extra points, so make sure they understand the basics of the meeting first. They'll be easy to pick on when you start, for sure. Girls, did we miss anything? What else should you? Got any advice? People training a team? Things you thought I did really bad, that was hard?
Your first meeting at the contest would be really rough. I didn't understand it until after the first meeting. something just clicked after we competed once, and then from then on I just understood it. It's just, you just have to go out there and like compete, and it doesn't matter what place you get, it's just a jackpot contest. But that's what really helped me, is just to see other teams and then like just know like what situation you're gonna be put in on the stage and stuff like that.
Good. Any other questions? I really did bring them to demonstrate things for you. So if you want to see them do something difficult, I didn't want to show you. They're here.
Use paper books.
Tell them some good debate ideas, Ivy. Things you like to talk about.
I always like to try to find some fun part of like my SAU that I can bring into my debates, because it's going to be unique to me, and so I don't have to worry about anyone else like saying the debate that I was going to do. So I don't have to worry about having to come up with one like on the fly. So I like to bring like my unique experience into it, and then I like to tell personal stories of mine, like if there's something that relates to me. Or we did a lot with like a blood shortage, or like donating blood or hosting blood drives. And my brother had to have a blood transfusion and he's born, so I like to say things like that and think, like personally, I know it saves lives, so it's a good idea. So I like to bring my own experience mainly into my debates.
Good.
What's your timeline? When do you start? What do you start? What's your timeline for getting that?
Well, it's hard to really I don't really have a good answer to that question, because, so these girls knew conduct when I started, and we went to nationals, and preparing them for Parley Pro was really, really easy, because they already knew a good chunk of the motions. They knew how to make meeting, they knew how to debate, and so adding additional motions in there and a few extra debates was really simple for them. Parley Pro is easy. My Parley Pro team this year, we practiced 15 times before state, probably. We took 2 tests, and we went to 2 contests, I think. But conduct is a lot, especially if you start with 8th graders, because it takes them a long time to figure out. And they'll be understanding it and going pretty good, and you'll have break, or OIE happens, and you haven't seen them in a while, and you come back, and they just all of a sudden don't know anything. They're just really special breed that way. But conduct takes a long time, but once they get that initial sense of a meeting down and are confident and able to stand up, and it goes much quicker. Conduct, I spend a lot of time. We start pretty early in the year. Well, after opening and closing ceremonies, they're pretty gung-ho and want to start learning. So after opening and closing ceremonies, we do a Parley Pro unit, and then I start having very sporadic practice, and then after OIU we practice a lot. Yeah.
So you do your practices in class, after class?
At the beginning of the year, every 8th grade student, I teach Parley Pro in class, and so we'll do some fun meetings, teach them how to debate, get them speaking out loud in front of their classmates, and that takes a while. That is a pretty hefty unit. And then after that, we have practice usually after school with the younger team. The older kids, typically a lot of them play sports, so we have that before school, but they don't have to practice as much, so it's not as bad. The younger kids, we have a lot of after school practice. But I teach all of them in class, and then those kids that already did opening and closing ceremonies, they want to keep doing opening and closing ceremonies, and this is their only option. So they usually come to practice after that. And if you tell them, like, wow, that was a great debate. Way to bring up tractors, Josh. Like, great job. They're like, holy cow, I'm really good at this. They are not good at it, but they think they are. And they keep coming back. And I'll let these girls go in and have practice with them while I'm meeting with the Parley Pro team. And hearing older kids tell them that they're doing a good job really, really helps. It helps having them there a lot. They really respect what their peers have to say. Now's the perfect time to put a plug in. These girls are for hire. If you have a team you want someone to listen to, they would love to come. Macy would love to help a chairperson. They are Parley Pro freaks. They like it way more than anyone else I have ever known. So if you want someone to listen to your meeting, they can Zoom in. If you want them to come talk to your class about how fun Parley Pro is, they would love to do that. So Yes.
Did you make your Parley Pro unit? Or,
Did I make it?
yeah, like,
Yeah. It's a pretty flexible situation because some kids will pick it up really easy. But yeah, I can share my stuff with you. Most of it is Shane Dunbar stuff. And really I write a motion on the board. Oftentimes I let kids choose what motion and then we just break it down. And so sometimes they'll pick up some motions really easy. And we'll have a mass meeting. I'll have like every conduct of chapter meetings motion on the board and I'll assign each kid one and then they'll start fighting over which motions they like to do. Kids love to stand up and yell division. It is like, they love it. And point of order, to tell their chairman they're wrong, oh, they love it. Yeah, so that usually it comes down to most of the time being spent just practicing and then speaking in front of their friends. Writing their debates takes them a long time when they're starting out. But yeah. Also, picking your chairperson can be kind of tricky sometimes. Macy, you're awesome. You're the national chairman. Macy's a terrible debater. She's so bad. Like, they're like, oh, let's switch spots. No, Macy had to be the chairman. She's, oh man, rough stuff. But she was really, really good. And she pays attention. She's really quick. She's a good speaker. She has a good presence. You need to have someone who is a pretty good speaker, especially in conduct, because they're going to start the meeting out, opening and closing ceremony stuff. But don't put your best chairman, don't put your best debater as the chair. Don't do it. If you have a really super smart kid who's a pretty good speaker, put them at vice president and let them debate. That's like Ivy. She's a good debater, really nerdy. She loves that stuff. She was a good team member, but yeah, Macy, she's... Make sure you choose your chair wisely, because once they learn that and they don't practice debating, it's kind of hard to go back.
do you train extra kids?
Yes.
How do you choose who actually goes into the area?
A test. Yeah, we will have a lot of young kids doing it, and they're all just kind of average usually, and you'll have 2 kids that are pretty good, but you'll want to have an extra chair because say that kid has baseball that day, or you need to have a chair that has no life and just is like blue and gold to the vein, baby. Loves FFA. Like, you either have to have a super dedicated kid like Macy, or you need to have 2 chairs. Because then they can't go. But young kids, I usually just give them a test, and I just say, highest test score goes. And that's a pretty easy way, because if you're like, well, this kid's significantly better than you, they're crushed. So, yeah. And the kids that understand it will do better on the test every time, because it's very, very simple concept. So,
So, done question.
No.
So opening ceremonies is
Yes.
part of it?
In conduct, not in Parley Pro. So conduct, they have 13 minutes and they do opening and closing ceremonies. Parley Pro, you have 11? 11 minutes.
It's 11.
No opening and closing ceremonies.
So you just jump right into the meeting? Just
Yes.
like
What do you say? The floor is now open for new business?
Yeah. Is there any new business?
Is there any new business? Yeah. And then start. Yep. Both of them only have a minute before the meeting. Conduct you can write. Parley Pro you can't. Some people will have their kids fold each corner of their motion card to kind of count how many times they've debated. I think that's pretty good idea when you're starting. But when you get to a contest, you can't write or fold the motion card, so you don't want them to become dependent on that. But kids will lose count, which is surprising.
I
But
used to put my hands down my side with fingers of how many I've debated that helped me remember. If I debated once, I'd just stand like this with my one finger down. Or if I had done 2 debates, I'd put 2 fingers down. So I knew how many I'd done, but it wasn't super noticeable to everyone else.
yeah.
But it was a good way to help me not forget how many I'd done. And then if I knew I needed to do another motion, I could do motions on this hand of how many I need to do, and then debates on this hand.
Yeah, I didn't know she did that. I never noticed. So. Good job, Ivy. What else do you think is hard for kids to learn? Huh?
Request for information was the hardest for me.
It's so random. Request for information was really hard for Macy because she had to just come up with a fact and spit it out. But try and teach your kids, well, you do whatever you want, but I try and teach my kids to ask for a request for information where Macy can say a number back to them. Because if I ask Macy what county Kingfisher's in, she's like, County, Canadian County, so Kingfisher County, like the name of our town is our county, and she's over there like, I don't know. But if you just let them lie about a number, how many kids are in her FFA chapter, sometimes she says 28, sometimes she says 500, but she says a number, so it works. But that typically is a little easier, request for information. She's not quite that bad, I'm just messing with you, Gibson.
So all of these are potential things.
Yes. Now, the state contest, you're probably not going to have any motions that bring a question back to the assembly. So take from the table, reconsider, rescind. Those, I would bet a lot of money don't show up at the state contest.
I've done it for like a decade and I've never seen any of those three.
Yeah.
At the state contest.
Yeah. When we were I prepared their team for the state contest. We were ready for a scenario. We were ready to divide the question. They were in full-blown panic mode. They just lost nationals, and they were like, "We're not losing again," and they're ready. And they freaked out. And it's like panic study. They're having practices by themselves, and we got there, and their motion card was like all conduct of chapter meeting motions. So usually the state card is pretty easy. I would say don't expect anything too groundbreaking. What was the motion this year about? Do you remember?
The senior one?
Yeah.
No.
I remember it was trophy cases for the littles.
Our year it was the flowers to put on veterans' graves.
Oh yeah, flowers to put on veterans' graves for Veterans Day was theirs. Yeah.
So, is it, and I may be, I don't know. Do you ever have a student be like a devil's advocate, like debate? Just always, they're always the devil's advocate, they're always the negative.
I have kids that typically want to be negative. You'll have kids, especially when they're first starting, like they're like, I want to be negative. And it's really weird. You'll have kids, well, at least I do. They're like, FFA is not cool, but I'm going to be on the conduct of chapter meetings team and I'm going to be negative every time. No, you're not. But kids that have postponed indefinitely or lay on the table, those are good ones to be negative on. But if you have amend, or if you end up having to make the main motion, you can't be negative. So if you teach one kid to be negative every time, it could get you in a real pickle. So more times.
If they're like debating though, they could be like, well, how are we going to afford this? Like,
Oh, yeah.
we lost this much and
Absolutely.
we only have this much available. Like, that would be something that you could
Yes, absolutely. But you don't.
But not like just negative.
Yeah, I don't want Ivy to be our negative
Yeah.
debater because every once in a while you'll get a card where only one or two students can make the main motion. And what if she's one of those? She stands up and she's like, wow, I have nothing positive to say. I've never practiced positive debate. I don't even have a positive introduction, you know?
Do you expect at least one of the 4 members to be negative if you are going to have to debate twice on the main motion? I didn't know if you designated that or not.
I tell them I prefer it, and
The only reason I asked that is because I learned, like, one judge, when we had no negative debaters, because it's not fun, and you're kind of limited in what you can talk about.
yes.
They're like, well, then why didn't y'all just pass the motion after the first round of debate? You have no reason to keep talking if all of you
Yeah.
are in favor of it. There's a consensus, let's keep going.
And it gives opportunity for different debate ideas to come up. Absolutely. We do try and have someone negative, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. And kids, have their required motion feels positive to them or they really like it. Kids will get hyped up about the motion. They'll be like, I have one debate idea and it is good. Their other 3 can be pretty bad, but they'll be so excited about their one debate that they lose sight of all else. Like they'll get really into it. So sometimes it'll keep them from being negative when they could have been, but that's a very good point. Sometimes it's hard to make sure they do it.
So when you are negative, you don't want to say something that's going to contradict somebody that already said something positive.
Yeah.
It's like if somebody says, oh, we have the funds to build this greenhouse, let's do it, and then you're negative and say, oh, we don't have the funds, that's going to contradict. You don't want your negative person to say that.
Yes.
We've had practice meetings where one person would say, focus on your trust fund MC, and then the other person money